Welcome to the Inspired Podcast, Leading the Way in Education. I'm your host, Andrea De La Cerda, and each week I'm bringing you insightful discussions and news about changes in the landscape of education. As a former middle school teacher and corporate communications executive, I'm here to share how my experience with corporate clients can and maybe should influence the way we think about marketing in the educational ecosystem. What's working, what isn't working, and we'll talk about how to change the paradigm of public versus private once and for all. In this episode, we'll evaluate how available grant funds can be a great catalyst for change in public education. We'll talk about how to create a compelling plan to leverage these funds to increase enrollment, and we'll also talk about some common obstacles that get in the way. As a side note, if after this podcast you'd like a deeper understanding of this topic and ways to best implement it, check out our resources at kandulacommunications.com. There you'll find instruction on this and other topics meant to support your team in building your capacity for strategic communication and partnership. So we really hope you'll check that out. But let's get started. As I've said before, and why I created this podcast, I truly believe that education is at a crossroads, and we really need to think differently about how higher education should prioritize an emphasis on growing enrollment to better serve their communities. Historically, public high schools and community colleges have faced challenges in prioritizing the recruitment of new students. Unlike universities or private institutions, they often operate within limited budgets and resources, which can definitely hinder their ability to invest in robust marketing and outreach efforts. If you're listening in on this and you're leading a district, you're an administrator at the district level or even at a school level, you probably can relate to this. And also, these institutions have traditionally relied on local populations or word-of-mouth referrals for student enrollment, leading to a lack of proactive recruitment strategies. For example, if you're a local school or a local district, you're relying on the families of children living in that community, in that district, or within the district's boundaries to attend the school. But we know now in the year 2024 that isn't always the case, that parents have many choices about where it is that they can send their students. So if districts are relying on that ADA, on that individual student being in a seat that day to receive funding, that we should really pay more attention as we're noticing trends that allow just more choice for parents. And consequently, many residents may remain unaware of the diverse educational opportunities that are actually available to them locally, resulting in underrepresentation and missed opportunities both for the institution and the communities that they serve. So with that in mind, let's talk about the current state of enrollment in public schools. As of January 2023, statistics showed for the first time since the pandemic a slight increase in enrollment of 1.2%. However, for several years and even before the pandemic, the trend we saw in many states was that enrollment continued to be sluggish. In 2010, there were around 11 million students enrolled at community colleges, according to data from the National Center for Education Statistics. But that number shrunk to 6.7 million in 2022 in the school year. But why? Obviously, there was a global pandemic, so we cannot underestimate the significance of that. But aside from the global pandemic, we also know that falling enrollment at any time in institutions can be caused by a number of other factors, including falling birth rates and higher tuition costs. But let's really talk about what the full picture is in this case. Despite the recent 1.2% slight increase, in 3 years, the number of college-bound students is actually projected to decrease by 15% over the next decade due to a sharp decline in the number of births following the Great Recession. So this decline has been coined as the birth dearth. It was so blunt and significant that it will lead the nation over the edge of an enrollment cliff potentially after 2025. And between 2025 and 2029, it's expected that the number of college-bound students will decline by over 400,000 in the span of 4 years, an average loss of 100,000 students per year. This is according to Nathan Graw's Higher Education Demand Index, which we'll include in the show notes. And if you're not familiar with that, there's a lot of documentation around Nathan Graw's Higher Education Demand Index that relates to this exact topic. So if this is true, this is dramatic decrease. And 2025 and between 2025 and 2029, it doesn't seem terribly far off in the future. So what should schools do now in anticipation for this dramatic decrease in enrollment? We're going to break it down. First, it requires a new mindset about why institutions of higher education require a proactive approach to increase in enrollment. As we said earlier, a lot of the reliance is on local word of mouth, but word of mouth may no longer be enough. Instead, it's the obligation of the public school to attract new students to their programs and figure out a way to institutionalize this in their organization. So some of this, when we think about strategic communications, which of course is what Kandula does, and it's what we bring to the education space, we like to think about creative solutions. So some things like establishing partnerships with high schools in the district to offer dual enrollment programs, college readiness workshops, and campus tours to introduce students to benefits of college as early as the 9th grade. And we're going to talk more about dual enrollment and these opportunities a little bit later on in this episode. But another is to develop creative, targeted marketing materials, including videos, social media campaigns, and interactive online content tailored to some of the specific demographic groups within the district, also highlighting your award-winning programs and things that your school is known for in the event that people may not know. And I think it's good to assume that they don't know. Organizing open houses, career fairs, and cultural festivals on campus can be a great way to engage the local community and highlight campus culture, not to mention reaching, in terms of cultural festivals, using that as an opportunity to reach some of the underserved communities in your local area. Another idea, implementing scholarship programs, financial aid workshops, tuition assistance initiatives to make college education more accessible and affordable for students within the district who perhaps may not otherwise have the opportunity. Develop outreach programs targeted at underrepresented populations, including minorities, first-gen college students, and low-income families to address barriers to enrollment and promote diversity. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Reaching underrepresented groups in your local area is the responsibility of these public institutions to lead us to create a more equitable opportunities for all students, and it really starts here. Also, identifying emerging fields or specialized academic programs that align with the needs and interests of the local community, and develop innovative degree programs, maybe certificates, to attract students seeking these unique educational opportunities. Not every district is going to be the same, and yours brings something very unique and important to students who are looking for exactly those programs. So don't underestimate what it is you bring that isn't necessarily the same as other schools. Perhaps a really strong career technical education program in a healthcare field or dental, or perhaps in the trades. These are important to highlight. Also, leveraging the institution's alumni network to serve as ambassadors and advocates for the institution, participating in recruitment. You can get them to maybe sign on to be mentors. They can perhaps attend networking events to connect with prospective students and encourage enrollment. This is an area that I see often in private schools and even sometimes charter schools, but very rarely at the public community colleges and high school districts. There's a real opportunity here, if you're not already doing this, to lean into your alumni network. Also, collaborating with local businesses, industries, and employers to develop internship programs, job placement, workforce development initiatives. All of these can provide students with the practical experience and pathway to success after graduation. But we know that implementing any of these initiatives takes resources, which will either require a redistribution of budgeted funds or new sources of funding. And a common source for public schools are both state and local grants, which we're going to dig into a little bit now. Grant funding can be a valuable resource for addressing financial barriers that often hinder enrollment, but given that writing the grant proposal alone is a heavy lift for many organizations, especially districts and nonprofits in rural communities. It doesn't always feel like a feasible solution. But what if the possibility is 200,000, 500,000, 1 million, or even $4 million? These funding opportunities, when strategically approached, can completely redefine initiatives across an entire district or consortium. And it is these projects that not only allow a more equal opportunity for all students to attend college, but also support these students through college and directly into an in-demand career. So the benefit for districts is that higher enrollment most often results in higher tax revenue. And it's for this reason that career readiness and workforce development grant opportunities are frequently being announced right now, both at the state and federal levels. One of the largest, most recent allotment of funds is California's Golden State Pathways Grant, which has promised $500 million in total to underserved communities and students across the state to support career readiness and the expansion of career technical education for all students to ensure that California thrives economically and socially. Preference for funds like these is typically extended to applicants from traditionally underserved school populations, including higher than average experiences of poverty, homelessness, foster care, school suspensions, expulsions, and dropouts. This approach aims to address disparities and create inclusive pathways for all students. Obviously, reaching these communities has many inherent challenges, especially when it comes to turning them on to college at all. In some cases, even families are not supportive of college for their kids and would instead like to see them stay home and support their parents and siblings. But what if college came to them? This is referred to as dual enrollment. I'll admit, even as a parent of 4 teenagers in high school, I had a very different assumption of what dual enrollment was. I used to think it had something to do with kids being enrolled in 2 different high school programs at once, or just in 2 different places at once. But that's not exactly the case. And if I was confused, maybe you are too. Well, let me break it down. Here's the bottom line. Dual enrollment allows all students to achieve college credit in their high school classroom. Certain courses, if approved by the community college, can be offered for college credit without the student ever leaving campus. So think of it like an AP class without the AP test and automatic college credit. Come on, that's just mind-blowing. Imagine if all students would have the same access to these classes no matter what their background, their grades, or abilities. So it isn't just for the smart kids. This is game-changing, both by improving equitable access to college classes for all students starting in the 9th grade and increasing enrollment for colleges. So each time a student enrolls in dual enrollment, they become a college student, but they're taking their class not with a college professor, but with their high school teacher. So it doesn't put the added pressure on the colleges to support that student, but the college still gets the added money allowed because they do have a new student enrolled. Grant funding can specifically support the development and expansion of dual enrollment programs, which could change the lives of your students and your impact on the community by ultimately placing students in the right jobs. According to the U.S. Travel Organization, the overall economy is suffering from a workforce crisis with 10.7 million job openings and just 5.9 million unemployed Americans. So making pathway initiatives like these just so much more valuable right now. But creating these pathways can be more complicated than it sounds. The importance of building strong relationships, which I mentioned earlier, with the local K-12 partners, cannot be overstated. It really does take a strong partnership between both of these institutions to be a win-win solution for students and community colleges. Not to mention allowing the high schools to feature these new dual enrollment plans as an opportunity to differentiate. By doing so, creates a more cost-effective solution for community colleges that leads to, in the end, like I said, increased enrollment by counting high school college students as FTE. But what happens to these high school students? A study from the National Student Clearinghouse found that actually 88% of community college dual enrollment students, if they're given that opportunity, continue into college after high school. So that says 88% is quite high. That clues us into the fact that dual enrollment isn't just a buzzword, but it actually does lead these students on their path into college and ultimately a job. This is a quote from Keith Curry, president and CEO of Compton College. He said, "Dual enrollment is a great equalizer as it relates to college access." And California dual enrollment has more than doubled at Compton College in California since 2016. These students were disproportionately students of color and now make up more than 1/3 of the college's enrollment. During the 2021-2022 academic year, 77% of dual enrollment students were Latino and 9% were Black. Overall increases in the number of dual enrollment students leads to the average cost of implementing these programs to actually drop. And dual enrollment students tend to be high achieving, do well in their classes, and are retained at relatively high rates. So in states with performance-based funding formulas that include dual enrollment students, these students could actually potentially bring in extra state funding in states where that's the case. In the end, grant funding for the purpose of creating stronger career readiness programs, expanding career technical education pathways, and dual enrollment opportunities will allow districts to see more than a return on the investment compared to the time and resources required to apply for these grants. Not to mention the impact on the lives of tens of thousands of students in your communities. These are just some of the changes that public education requires to create, again, those equitable opportunities for all students to achieve the skills to really ultimately gain the career they love. We are on the right track, but we have a ways to go. And that's all we have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please catch us next week for another new episode. And just a reminder to please review and subscribe. We hope you'll join us next week. Take care.